Cheeky social history. The history of cheekiness is not a discipline of historiography, and I do not know whether it would do the matter a favour if it were to become one. History is always a secondary force that must be preceded by an impulse of the moment. As far as cynicism is concerned, the impulse should be obvious. With respect to cynicism and cheekiness, the impulse will probably be sought in vain. Since antiquity, the role of the city in the genesis of satirical consciousness is socio-historically uncontroversial. However, in Germany after the decline of the cities during the 30 Years' War, there was for a long time no city with a metropolitan character. As late as 1831, Heinrich Heine had to emigrate to Paris, the principal city of the 19th century, in order to breathe liberating city air. I went because I had to. As the northern Italian city cultures, which Jacob Burckhardt described, exploded with sarcasm, and Roman and Florentine wit rang shrill in their citizens' ears, Germany possessed, apart from Eulenspiegel, the plebeian proto-cynic of modern times, admittedly no Aretino, but nevertheless a cobbler from Nuremberg who wrote droll stories. Old Hans Sachs, who somewhat unjustly is remembered as the progenitor of narrow-minded middle-class humour. This Sachs, perhaps guided by good instinct, had also written a dialogue about Diogenes, and thus already at the beginning of bourgeois culture there is a link to the cynical impulse. But Nuremberg degenerated and rose to prominence again only with the coming of the railway, and as a site of the Nazi rallies. In that place where the first presentiment of the bourgeois principle of culture had flourished, cynical realism and urban laughter, petty bourgeois master cynicism was perfected in the humorless mass parade of columns for subsequent war cemeteries. The only German city that, as far as cheekiness goes, left no possibility unexhausted was, and is to the present day, Berlin. For the spirit of those who paraded in Nuremberg, this city was always a little eerie. Gottfried Benn captures the provincialism of the marches when he caricatures their ideas. Thinking is cynical. It takes place above all in Berlin. It is in its place the Weser song is recommended. Cheekiness always had a rougher time in Germany than in Latin countries. More often than not, it came on stage as master cynicism, as disinhibition of the powerful. Heinrich Heine, who represents the exception, but he was a child of the French-tinged Rhineland, had to content himself in his search for indigenous models and allies with other traditional German characteristics. Embodied in the snarled truthfulness of Voss, in the moral strong clarity of Lessing, and in Luther's courageous confessional power. Nevertheless, not without justification, a characteristic tradition of German cheekiness could be connected to Luther, for his Protestantism came at a time when it was not usual to say to Kaisers, "Here I stand, I cannot do otherwise," an act of reckless courage and the most willful frivolity. Moreover, in Luther an animal element, a power appears that approves itself, a vital archetype of swinishness that is inseparable from cynical motifs. Apart from the city, three social dyes of serene refractoriness have played an essential role in the history of cheekiness: the carnival, the universities, and the bohemians. All three function as safety valves through which needs that otherwise are not given their due in social life can achieve a limited release. Here cheekiness has had a space in which it has been tolerated, even if the tolerance has lasted only a short time and can be rescinded. The old carnival was a substitute revolution for the poor, a kingly fool was elected who reigned over a thoroughly inverted world for a day and a night. In this inverted world, the poor and the decent brought their dreams to life as costumed oafs and bacchanals, forgetting themselves to the point of truth. Cheeky, lewd, turbulent, and disgraceful. One was allowed to lie and to tell the truth, to be obscene and honest, drunken and irrational. From the carnival of the late Middle Ages, as Bakhtin has shown, satirical motifs flow into art. The colourful languages of Rabelais and other Renaissance artists draw on the parodistic spirit of carnivalism. It inspires macabre and satirical traditions and makes fools and harlequins, buffoons and punchers into standard figures of a great comical tradition that fulfills its task in the life of society even when it is not Shrove Tuesday. Class societies can scarcely survive without the institution of the inverted world and the crazy day, as the Indian and Brazilian carnivals demonstrate. Likewise, since the late Middle Ages, universities have become important to the social economy of cheekiness and cynical intelligence. They were by no means simply places of teaching and research. In them there romped also a vagrant, extravagant, youthful intelligence that was clever enough to know something better than just cramming. In this respect, the Sorbonne in Paris enjoys special fame. It formed a city within a city, the Latin Quarter, in which we recognise the forerunners of all later bohemians. In the bourgeois epoch, the years at the university were for the students a time when they could defer the serious things in life, when they could take liberties before going on to careers and an orderly life. Those adults who later, as respectable gentlemen, maintained that they too were young are thinking back on student larks, student freedoms and intrigues. Life around the universities gave the concept of youth a particular colour in the bourgeois period. The old gentlemen tore their hair only officially, but they secretly noted with satisfaction when their sons did exactly the same things. The dignitaries find it eerie to be confronted by a young generation that is too cool for nonsense, and that, precociously cynical, gets straight to the heart of the matter. The 20th century has known several such cool generations, starting with the Nazi fraternity, in which a troop of cool snot-noses mingled with the populist idealists. Later they became fighter pilots or jurists in the system, and still later, Democrats. Following them came the sceptical generation of the 50s, which stands today at the helm, and following them the generations of the 70s and 80s, among the early developers in cynicism are already making themselves noticed as New Wave. The Bohemians, a relatively recent phenomenon, played a prominent role in the regulation of the tensions between art and bourgeois society. Bohemianism was a space in which the transition from art into the art of living was tried out. For a century, Bohemianism gave the neo-cynical impulse a social shelter. As a regulator for bourgeois careers, it was above all important because, similarly to the universities, it served as a psychosocial moratorium, quoting Erickson, in which young bourgeois could live out their crises of adjustment and the transition from the world of school and home to the world of serious occupations. Research has established that there were only a few long-term bohemians. For the great majority of bohemians, the milieu remained a transit station, a space for testing out life and departing from the norms. There they used their freedom to work out their rejection of bourgeois society until a perhaps more grown-up yes but took its place. If we look today at these nurturing soils and living spaces in which deviation and critique, satire and cheekiness, cynicism and willfulness thrive, it becomes immediately clear why we must fear the worst for embodied cheeky enlightenment. Before our very eyes, cities have been transformed into amorphous clumps where alienated streams of traffic transport people to the various scenes of their attempts and failures in life. For a long time now, carnival has meant not inverted world, but flight into safe world, of anesthesia from a permanently inverted world full of daily absurdities. We know that, at least since Hitler, bohemianism is dead, and in its offshoots, in the subcultures, cheeky moods are to be found less than the cheerless attitudes of withdrawal. And as far as the universities are concerned, let's not talk about that. These mutilations of cheeky impulses indicate that society has entered a stage of organised seriousness in which the playgrounds of lived enlightenment are becoming increasingly clogged. This is what dampens the climate of this country so much. We live on in a morose realism, not wanting to be noticed and play the respectable games. Cynicism prickles beneath the monotony. A clear-sighted coquetting with its own schizophrenia betrays the unhappy consciousness in academia and elsewhere. The provocations seem to be exhausted. All bizarre twists of modern existence seem to be already tried out. A state of public, respectable torpor has been entered. A tired, schizoidly demoralised intelligentsia plays at realism by contemplatively walling itself up in harsh circumstances.